I welcome you all. Our format for today's session is that first we'll have a presentation. It will be followed by a panel discussion, and then later we can have the house will be open for, our little house will be open for question and answer session. Right? Yes.
So if you say अगर उर्दू में बात करना है तो
कर सकते हैं. अच्छा. ओके. बहुत शुक्रिया, आपने मेरा दिल का बड़ा काम आसान कर दिया. Lara is from Italy and she speaks fluently.
That's great. Yeah. But I'm going to present in English.
So, UNGI, United Nations Girls Education Initiative, they studied TCF model a couple of years back. And the reason for the research was that how TCF is able to...
Please speak a little bit.
Okay. How TCF is able to put more girls, females, into the school. So they have studied in detail. We had requested them to come over and present their findings with us, and they graciously accepted it. So I'd request Aisha Khan again to present. Then it will be followed by a panel discussion, and then we can take questions. So Aisha, please.
Okay. Can I stand up, or will that mess with the... I should stand. Okay. So, hi, my name is Aisha Khan. I'm with the Collective for Social Science Research in Karachi, and my colleagues Samar Zubairi and Rashid Mahmood worked with us on this research study that was actually TCF was selected by the United Nations Girls Education Initiative for its best practices in the area of girls' education. So there was actually a competition around the world of organizations that were doing innovative work in girls' education. Or unme se, there were 17 practices or organizations selected to do deep case studies on their work. One of them was TCF in Pakistan, and there was another one from Pakistan called an NGO called Ahang that does groundbreaking work in life skills-based education. So there are two reasons to be proud of what we're doing in girls' education in Pakistan. Can we have the next slide, please? So just not that you necessarily need any reminder, but I thought just to set the stage for the difficult context in which TCF is working. We know, for example, that the percentage of population that completes primary school in Pakistan is much higher, male than female. We know that the dropout rates are very high for girls, and we know there's a specifically difficult juncture between primary and secondary schools. How do you get girls who make it into primary to stay in secondary schools? As a result of these kinds of major impediments, girls are more impacted by sociocultural inequalities than boys are in Pakistan. And as a result, we have higher male attendance rates, higher attendance rates in urban rather than rural settings. And obviously, it is only those families who have higher income that can afford to send their children to school. So it is in this difficult context in Pakistan that we have TCF doing some very innovative practices. Next slide, please. The methodology of our study was that we looked at what was the national level data that we knew about primary girls' enrollment rate in Pakistan, and we compared that with the TCF data that you keep in your own data set based on all the schools that TCF operates around Pakistan. That was a big part of our work. It took quite a bit of time to sort through the data, and we'll be sharing with you some of those findings. The other part of the study was to do a qualitative analysis of what are the actual practices in TCF schools that lead to high enrollment rates of girls, but also their higher retention rates. Because it's one thing to enroll a girl in school, but if you bring in a girl in year one, how do you make sure the girl stays until the end of year 5? Often what happens is that you'll have a girl who leave in year 1, she might come back or may never come back, you might enroll a different girl in year 3, and this kind of problem multiplies in Pakistan when you cannot retain the same girls throughout primary. Next slide, please. There were two major questions that we asked. One was, how does TCF manage to create these high retention rates, A? And B, does TCF in any of its innovative practices actually impact some of the structural reasons that impede girls' education in Pakistan? So to answer the first question, we found that TCF uses a number of interesting techniques that are very simple, but TCF uses them consistently and with a lot of dedication. One is they prioritize and incentivize 50% girls' enrollment in each school, which means that principals are told that this is a major policy priority for us, and schools actually compare with each other in terms of how soon are they able to reach this 50% target of girls' enrollment. Another very important factor is the security provided on campus, whereas in rural areas of Pakistan, particularly in Punjab, security on campus may not be such an issue. You have urban centers such as Karachi, where security in the poorer, lower income parts of the city is a major concern and a major reason why people are not comfortable sending their girls to school. We find that by TCF creating a female-only environment, all teachers are female, ayahs are female, the only male employee is the chowkidar at the gate of the school. That combined with the fact that it has high boundary walls and a very secure campus actually helps to incentivize families to send their girls to school. So this is an important takeaway for other people working in education in low-income areas. There's a fantastic system of monitoring and evaluation that TCF ensures, and it's important to recognize that even in families from very low-income households, they really do care about the quality of the education. It's not just that they're sending a girl to any school. It makes a really big difference to them to know that TCF teachers are well trained and that the quality of education is guaranteed. The monitoring and following up of attendance of girls is a very important factor that teachers and principals shared with us in our interviews, that when a girl comes to school, if she's a regular student and suddenly absent for a day or two, the teacher or the principal themselves go into the community to inquire as to why the child has not come to school. Next slide, please. There is a benefit to the long-standing relationship that TCF has built with the communities in which they work. As one principal explained to us, in the initial days when we would go house to house with school ayahs, the men would not allow women to open doors, and they worried that we have come to spoil the girls and give them wrong ideas. Because initially this is an approach that families who do not have a history of sending their girls to school are afraid that this will be the outcome of girls' education. We used to dress up like the local women in burqas and chadar, cover our faces and speak their language so they did not think we came from outside the community. In other words, it was a fairly hostile terrain at first in many low-income communities, but over time TCF managed to build up trust by working directly with the households. Next slide, please. Now, the next area where TCF manages to make longer-term structural impact is by addressing some of the reasons behind gender inequality in education. And we found that one way in which TCF does this is by maintaining a women-centered program in the field. It is a very high employer of women. Up to now, I think the figure in ITH is 14,000 women are employed by TCF nationwide. It's one of the highest employers of women in the private sector, if not the highest, I think. And not just within the school campus, but by developing a very rich female literacy program for mothers in TCF community, they have managed to, I think, over the years, provide literacy to about 70,000 women, 75,000 women. So not only does this help the women in the community and empower them in their own lives, but it helps to ensure that the link between the mothers and the daughters does not get broken by virtue of education, because this becomes a concern of families. But what happens is that TCF has actually become like a reverse kind of awareness-raising mechanism, because what happens is that in the school campus, principals and teachers teach many life skills to the children. They teach them things about hygiene, basic health practices, how to deal with wider society, social skills, and many things that we often don't even think need to be taught in a formal school environment. And what happens is that the girls come home and they share this with their mothers. Now, the mothers over time would feel very left out of the process if they feel कि हमारी बच्चियां बहुत आगे जा रही हैं, हम लोग पीछे तक. Now the mothers are brought into the TCF community. They become more literate and they feel that they're moving along with their daughters into the next phase. Now, one major reason why this is also so important is that it helps to increase the buy-in to keep the girls in school past puberty. Because often what happens is that when a girl enters puberty, she's withdrawn from school. Next slide, please. Interviews with mothers that we conducted found many quotes like the ones that I put on the screen here. For example, one mother told us in Rawalpindi that we don't want the life of our girls to be like ours, so we are sending them to school. Another mother said, a girl should get enough education so that she can look after herself financially and not be dependent on others. This is actually very socially far-reaching in its implications because not only are women having, mothers having a sense of buy-in towards girls' education, but they're having a sense that it has a transformative impact on their income-generating abilities. Next slide, please. Another key element, of course, is the dedication of principals that we have found in the schools. Principals, not only are they running the schools very well, but they are becoming community leaders. And community leaders in terms of helping to change gendered norms in the communities. One way they do that is by advocating later age at marriage. They work very hard with families to try to ensure that at puberty, when girls are often taken out of school and immediately organized into some marriage scenario, the principals intervene to try to convince the families to postpone the age at marriage. It's very difficult to say don't have your child married so early, but if you say to them that there are economic benefits of just giving her a few more years of education, just move her into secondary school, you're creating a sense in the families that maybe there is an economic benefit, not only to a health benefit for retaining the girls in school. Another way in which principals and teachers are helping to change social gender norms is by maintaining the co-education of TCF primary schools. I think that, in Pakistan, we often think that things are not possible because they're not commonly done, but TCF schools have shown that co-education is not only possible, but is very healthy for the children. When we interviewed children, they talked about their classmates as friends. They were learning ways of boys and girls interacting that did not have very sexualized connotations. In other words, we were helping to model friendship between the sexes rather than the usual kind of either hostility or suspicious interactions. I think that's not always maintained in secondary school because in some communities in Pakistan, families will not send their daughters to school if it is secondary school, if it's co-educational. But I think maintaining this at the primary level is essential. Next slide, please. This just summarizes basically all the points I've already made, and I just want to add one last point. You'll see the last on the bullet points that TCF enables girls and their mothers to start the process of obtaining basic documentation. We're just going to be done, but the last point is that TCF helps mothers and fathers get the bay forms and the Shanakhti cards and the documents that are necessary for them in order to complete the enrollment process for their children. And in Pakistan, where women lag behind in being documented as citizens, this is actually a very important role because without bay forms, you don't get Shanakhti cards. Without that, you can't have a bank account, you can't vote. There are many things that you cannot do in addition to accessing educational facilities. But so TCF, rather than just turning away the families that don't have documentation, they actually take the time to help an uneducated family go through the difficult process of getting documentation. And just from the work that we do on gender in Pakistan, it shows that without this documentation, very little further benefits of being citizens of the state can be enabled. So this is really very important. Okay, I think I'll just end here. Is there one more slide? This is just we can discuss this in more detail perhaps in our discussion. But can my co-authors join me on the panel? Now we can answer some questions.
Thank you very much, Aisha, for your presentation. And we'll just have a short panel discussion and it will be followed by question and answer session. So I'll just introduce the panelists. Rashid has been the research officer during this research throughout the time. Samar Zubairi is a social science researcher whose work has focused on social policy issues. She's currently working in Toronto with an NGO called Mother Craft. And Samar has done her MSc in Development Studies from School of Oriental and African Studies. Aisha is a director with Collective for Social Science Research in Karachi, a premier research institute in Pakistan known for multidisciplinary approach and capacity for field-based studies. Her work focuses on gendered development and policy issues. And she is, mashallah, an author also, the women's movement in Pakistan, activism, Islam, and democracy. Aisha, in our earlier discussion, you had mentioned that there is a direct correlation between female enrollment and fundraising. And since there are a lot of people who are related to fundraising,
I mean, I will certainly say on this point that in the West, this point is the most powerful point for us. In the UK and the US, when you put female 50%, it is the most powerful selling point for TCF. And for me personally, it's the reason I'm with TCF. But I'm not representative. But I mean, in the West, this is the most powerful point.
Absolutely. And that is what exactly intrigued me, and I wanted to again ask her that if she could shed some more light on it.
Yeah, so I think that when you are discussing TCF's good work in this regard, you can also share with potential donors to TCF that not only does TCF have by and large 50% boy, 50% girl enrollment, but it makes all these extra efforts to retain the girls in school. But the problem we have in Pakistan is such a high dropout rate of girls, and we particularly have that problem when girls enter puberty. So TCF is cognizant of this, and they do their best to involve not only the girl but the family as well. And other schools, other school systems don't have that kind of outreach at all. So it is a major selling point, and the delayed age at marriage that results in from higher girls' education is a key indicator for so many other outcomes for women in Pakistan. Their health, the health and livelihood of the children, reduction of maternal morbidity and mortality, and contraceptive prevalence. So this is all very important. And not only that, but the fact that so many TCF girls are becoming TCF teachers. Like, I've met teachers who had gone to TCF schools, and they're wonderful teachers too. So I think the list of things goes on, and it would be very important for TCF to highlight that everywhere.
That's a valid point, and we have been using it, but probably we don't use it enough. And that is probably one of the reasons I put it in front of Aisha, that we probably don't realize that how important it is and what such a big thing which TCF is doing right now. Samar, I wanted to know about the community side. That have you noticed any changes in the last 20 years in communities as far as female enrollment is concerned?
Yeah, I think, research on Pakistan and the region has showed that there has been a change, a favorable change in the attitude of parents who are wanting to send their girls to school. But however, the barriers to accessing education still exist. Though I think what has happened over the past recent years is that the number of non-state actors has increased, and they're working to remove these barriers, such as TCF, and working to engage communities to change the attitude of families and help send girls to school. as Aisha was just saying, TCF data shows that where schools have been established in communities and have been there for a number of years, girls' enrollment rates are generally higher. And so our study, we use TCF data to show that schools that have been in communities for over 10 years typically have over 40% girls' enrollment, whereas newer schools take time to build up to that 40-50%.
And could you please shed a little light on that? What prompts the dropout for females, since we are talking about things which encourage female enrollment, but what are the reasons for dropout?
So, as Aisha mentioned, as girls...
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sure.
Louder.
As Aisha mentioned, one of the main reasons is as girls get older, their mobility is further restricted. So, girls who would be allowed to go to primary school, once they reach puberty, their parents perhaps, don't let them travel that distance to school. So distance to school is one of the main reasons. Within the broader context in Pakistan, you see issues of sanitation, school infrastructure, security being big reasons for dropouts. However, if we look at TCF has been able to overcome these issues. And when we look at TCF data, we see that the main reasons for dropout are mobility of the family. So say in Karachi, we have a lot of migrant workers. And so when families move, then children fall out of school. Or when there's been a large gap in their schooling, if they've been pulled out of school for certain family reasons, it's hard to get them to go back into schooling.
Thank you. Aisha, coming back to you, you had mentioned about documentation that TCF helps in managing documentation for the females. So what do you exactly mean by that?
You see, the interesting thing is that there's a lot of social barriers in Pakistan to women even having Shanakhti cards. And there's resistance within the family even for men to facilitate their wives to have Shanakhti cards. But when a girl's documentation is ensured from the time she's in primary school and she has the Bay form, she can easily get a Shanakhti card herself without having to rely on a male member of her family to help her. Mm-hmm. So I think it puts them at an advantage compared to other girls. And as we know, in Pakistan, we have an 11 million strong gender gap in voting. And in order to close that gap, the main method of doing that is, of course, to get Shanakhti cards for girls, because they will only, they're automatically registered to vote now if they have Shanakhti cards. So it's a very important empowering device for the girls simply to have their documentation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And did you, during your research, any interesting incident which happened while you were doing your research with TCF?
So one interesting incident that happened was in Machar Colony, which is a multi-ethnic locality in Karachi, low income, where when we arrived at the school, we discovered that most of the windows were broken in the school from the upper floors. So we asked the principal, why are the windows broken? And she said, because some recent migrants from the tribal areas who had left because of the conflict in Fatah, who had moved to Machar Colony, felt that the little boys who were only up to year 5 in age were looking at the women from the top windows of the school, and that they were looking at the women living in the residences below, and they were regularly throwing stones to break the windows. So the teacher said, it's almost impossible to fix them, because the moment we put new windows in, they get broken again. And then we had a video team with us that day who went to the roof to have a look around to see whether we could take some nice video shots of the Machar Colony from the TCF school. But some of the men from that community came running to the school and basically said they wanted to grab the cameraman and thrash him because he was filming their women. So TCF bundled us into their TCF van, and we left from one side, and the camera equipment left in a different car, and we had to run away as fast as we could. But the point is, and what the principals tell us, is that over time, even the most resistant families eventually come around to the idea of girls' education, but it does take a little bit of time. And that's why the importance of TCF as a consistent school working with the community is so vital.
Thank you.
Forum is open. Yeah.
I mean, from your starting statement, obviously TCF is very special because we were chosen by the UN. But and this is, and obviously they're great at doing this. But from the other 17 people, and they were all doing great things. Was there anything that TCF could do that it's not doing? Judging from what you've seen the other 17 people do, could we improve ourselves in some way?
Not all of the other 17 projects were about schools like this.
Okay.
For example, the Ahang project was about the life skills curriculum that they developed, which is rolled out in government schools. So it wasn't really comparable to the others.
From your own knowledge and experience of this matter, can you think of anything that we could do that we're not doing?
Do you want to say?
Well, I think, this is not related to the actual programming, but I think conducting more research, like the research we've done, is very important. And not just conducting the research, but disseminating the research and making it accessible. And so making it accessible to people like you. And then so you are able to discuss with credibility what TCF is doing. And I think that will help attract, donations from individuals, organizations, as well as attract sort of more international funding.
I think it's a worldwide thing as well that women empowerment is becoming really important globally. Like, it's not just in Pakistan, it's like a global problem, even in corporations and all that. So people are aware that women empowerment is very, important, and 50% of the world population is women. And if we're not put into conversations, like, the world will stay economically where it is. So we really need to, and I think that's our most powerful line right there, that we're not just about education, we're a social, like we are an organization which is aware of the socio-economic problems of developing countries, and that's what we're tackling. And we're actually in the process changing the mindsets of men as well, and we never really go there. And that is the biggest thing, like we're changing. If the women are coming from these communities to the schools, the mindset of the men are changing. They are becoming your advocates as well. So that's a really big selling point for TCF as well. Just wanted to make
Lady has a question. I'll just...
You said that you keep 50-50 ratio of the male and female in the classroom. Is it maintained throughout, or is it just at the time of the admission that you started getting the children in?
Do you want to?
Sure. So I think principals are very motivated to maintain 50% enrollment throughout the primary schooling, and they actively work to ensure that girls stay in school. So if a girl or boy drops out of school and they don't come for a number of days, principals actually go into the community and try and find out why they haven't attended. Often they'll go to the house themselves, try to encourage parents to send their children back to school. So this is something that comes from the organizational structure at the top, and when we did our fieldwork, we saw that this was sort of instilled within the school and the principals.
I think the second part of the question, in the higher education, in the secondary school, are there any social problems involved because of the two genders being in the same community, in the same place, in the same classroom?
Our study
encountered by the TCF.
Our study was specifically only on primary schools. But there are problems that are encountered at all secondary schools in Pakistan, which is one reason why the schools tend to be co-educational, but not because there's so many issues between the boys and the girls. It's usually for community reasons. The communities want the schools to be separate, otherwise they won't send the girls.
Yes. I think just respond to that. The Punjab law says that the secondary school for boys and girls should be separate. It should have separate buildings.
They are separate.
But not in sin. Not in sin, but by Punjab it's a law that you should have separate. They would not register you as a school if you have a co-education.
Yeah,
I'm very curious to ask, what is the game changer? In your research, did you come across women, girls continuing their education and how the families are not open to it, but then eventually you said they do become open to the idea? What is the one thing that changes their mind? Because so many times we have these drawing room conversations, it should happen, but what actually does happen, if I'm trying to educate my Masi's daughter and she says there's no need, what do I have to say to convince her?
It would be nice if there was one game-changing thing that we could say, do this, do that.
Did you come across?
Well, I have a hunch, maybe someone has a hunch of different things, but I think one major game-changing thing, certainly in urban Pakistan, is that the girls will become economically viable. That they can work. If they do their metric pass, they can work. And so many girls teach not only at TCF, but in other private schools. And from my own field work in other projects also, I find that that is a very important game changer, that our girls can add to the income of the family. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, people have mentioned women's empowerment, and, one of the aspects of women's empowerment is just being able to imagine a different life. And so once, within communities, mothers and then fathers are able to imagine a different life for their children, then I think that's the first step for them to be able to, then want to change that. And so, they're able to see the teachers and the principals that they're all women, they're earning an income. And I think once families understand that their girls are able to generate an income and then eventually have a better household environment through their education, that motivates them to want to send their children to school.
Rashid?
जी समझ ने कहा मैं एक एग्जांपल कैन आई स्पीक इन उर्दू तो एक एग्जांपल है कि वहाँ पे जब मुजफ्फरगढ़ में एक फादर था, वो डिफरेंटली एबल मीन थोड़ा डिसेबल थे, बट वो पढ़े लिखे थे, मैट्रिक तक किया था, लेकिन वो कुछ कर नहीं सकते थे, चल फिर नहीं सकते थे, एक शॉप चला रहे थे। उनकी वाइफ थी, वो पढ़ी लिखी नहीं थी, तो वो खेतों में काम करती थी। तो वो अपनी बच्चियों को इसलिए पढ़ा रहे थे कि वो कह रहे थे कि अगर मेरी बीवी पढ़ी लिखी होती तो आज वो जॉब करती, कोई काम करती। फिर वो TCF में अपने बच्चियों को पढ़ा रहे थे, और प्रिंसिपल जो थी उसका एक बहुत रोल था वहाँ पे, प्रिंसिपल एक रोल मॉडल थी उनके लिए। तो आई थिंक ये वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट शायद
रोल मॉडल का जो जिक्र किया भी था मेरे ख्याल ने अपनी प्रेजेंटेशन के अंदर भी। आई थिंक वी हैव 3 minutes to end this session. Okay. तो आपने ये बताने के लिए मैं समझ you had a question.
Just adding to the comment that was said earlier, that TCF actually reinforces the gender ratio, the balance of the gender ratio through principal's performance appraisal भी as well. So the principal needs to kind of have those conversations constantly until the family decides to send their girl to the school. And the principal also incentivizes the family, because वो अक्सर हमारे पास cases हैं जहाँ पे बच्चे प्रिंसिपल ने बोला कि आपकी बच्चे की फीस में 50% कर दूंगी if you send your daughter to the school. So principals kind of have that autonomy, and they can take those decisions based on the dynamics they are in.
Thank you.
And I just want to add one closing thing, is that I found the principals different probably from any other school principals around, because it is their life mission to do this.
Yes.
It is their life mission to get these girls into school and to provide both the boys and the girls with an education. Many do not come from well-off families. They don't go home to some luxury place. They live nearby. But they are the most dedicated people I've ever met, along with lady health workers in Pakistan, who do this kind of work as a mission. So, and it shows.
Yeah. We had a panel discussion. We had stories from principals yesterday.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things that came out from the whole thing, and exactly what you just said, is ownership. It's like they were not saying TCS school, my school. That was so brilliant. Like, it was just incredible that they were actually taking ownership of building those communities, which is very heartwarming to see.
Interestingly, ownership is part of one of TCS values as well.
Absolutely. And it starts, that's what I went up to.
It starts from the top,
Yes, and I went to the founders and actually thanked them all that you actually, this is the biggest job that you have done with TCF. Forget everything else. You actually brought that in ownership, without even meeting all of them, into each and every individual who actually comes into TCF.
And also there's a class barrier that gets closed, because I sat in on many classes, and I can tell you very confidently I would have been happy to leave my children in those classrooms.
Absolutely.
So, the quality of education that we want for our children is what they are getting.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.